Y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Um, I appreciate you guys willing to listen to this little bit of presentation, and I also appreciate Stacy uh, giving me this opportunity. I know Stacy was going to actually do the presentation this morning, but uh, one of the things that has really been at the forefront, obviously with this committee, and I think with a lot of us, is workforce and workforce development, and that is really something I think that is changing every day. I think as Siobhan was noting about the different hiring tendencies and those type of things, we continue to see different things change. The last time that PEDC and I think the community actually looked at workforce development was probably 11 years ago in terms of actually doing some sort of research or study. So it has been a long time in the interim. So one of the things that came out of the Pearland Prosperity Plan was really to, come up with some goals. This is just the 7 overarching goals that we will be looking at through our Pearland Prosperity Plan. And actually, a lot of this gets into looking at, how do we make Pearland a better place? As part of that, there are 7 focus areas, and then down here at number 7 is workforce and talent. And these are not necessarily in the order of most important, it's just the way they were laid out. Whenever we looked at uh, doing that, the strategy actually came up with these 3 different initiatives for us to look at within the Pearland Prosperity Plan. So, 1, 2, and 3, connecting and enhancing our talent pipeline. And I think that's one of the key things that we are really learning and visiting with employers and visiting with our community colleges or schools in that regard, is that it is a changing dynamic, much more so than ever before, I think. Then also look at, our leveraging our special diversity. Pearland is one of the most diverse communities in the whole United States when you look at our ethnic makeup. So that makes us actually quite different. But how do we leverage that and go forward with that? And then obviously the other thing that we're going to be looking at is engaging our young professionals, because that's something that we always need to be aware of and getting people involved in that regard. To do that, this is a presentation that I had actually Thomas P. Miller put the slides together. They are the firm that we're going to utilize for a workforce study. But to do that, before we actually selected them, we entertained and interviewed 5 different firms from across the United States that specialize in workforce development and actually coming up with implementation plans. Eventually narrowed it down to 2 firms, received proposals from them, reviewed them, interviewed them again, and then eventually we looked at Thomas P. Miller and really felt that they would be the best fit in terms of moving us forward. This is just some basic information on Thomas P. Miller. They are based out of Indiana, actually in Indianapolis. They have done just all types of work with every size of organization, whether it's a small community, workforce board, states, uh, communities such as our size. So they have a really good breadth of history in working with communities and developing workforce implementation programs. And I think that's one of the things that really drew us to them is their capability to actually do implementation. Uh, there are a lot of firms that do this type of work, but they actually do specialize in workforce. So that was really something we felt very important. The project itself is going to be broken up to multiple tasks when you look at it. And obviously that's something that everyone does. The initial things that we're going to be looking at doing is actually the project launch. And that's where we'll actually have a kickoff meeting, actually establish a steering committee. And that's one of the things that will be really important, I think, going through this process is that steering committee. We'll be looking about 8 to 12 people, and it will come from probably some of the folks from this committee will be on there, but it's going to come from our local employers, higher education, K through 12, community-based organizations, in that regard, such as the chamber, businesses. So, I mean, it'd be a wide breadth of folks that will be involved on that initial part. And then the other thing is actually to request documents uh, on there from relevant organizations. So Stacy, if you guys have done something, or Kevin, you guys have done something recently about workforce development or something like that, some research that you have, if you could share that with us, and we can pass that on to them, because one of the things that they will do obviously is looking at information about our region so that the consultants can get a better idea of what's available in that regard. So it's a deep data dive in that regard, but we will furnish them obviously with information that we have, so that it just gives them a good background in terms of that. And then the next thing I actually is, that asset inventory. And that's really what I was just talking about. The following thing is to actually conduct a labor market analysis. And that really will get into looking at the specifics of our community. And obviously, Pearland is unique because we're very long and narrow. But we know that we draw from a huge area, not just Pearland itself in terms of our workforce. So we're really looking at how do we, quantify what is here, and where do we, set those boundaries. So we'll be using a lot of different information when we look at the workforce characteristics. We're going to be looking at things such as our population demographics, race, ethnicity, age, educational attainment. And then obviously one of the things that's probably most important is to really understand is our commuting patterns. Those have changed over the last few years, obviously, when you look at some of the things that have happened in terms of business development. So that's something that we'll be looking at. Then things such as labor force, how many people are unemployed, what's the participation rates, those type of things. Get into doing an industry analysis. What are our major sectors, and what are the subsectors? Where are people actually clustered in terms of employment? And then look at other things such as occupational analysis. That will include projected levels, earnings, those type of things. So it's going to be a lot of information that we'll eventually get into, and all this will be collected and generated into a report. Then the next thing that we'll get into, which is probably going to be one of the most important parts, is the actual stakeholder interviews. We are planning to do at least 40, it may be more. We haven't determined that. We are working on an initial interview list to provide Thomas Miller, but and it really is gained or geared towards looking at, how do we align ourselves, as it says in there, and collaborate. And I think that's a key thing that we're looking at when we're working with our local businesses. How do we do that? What's the best way? What are the needs? Siobhan, if you were to, tell me what specific things you're going to be looking at, I can guarantee you some of them are going to be very similar to what Paul might have, and then on the other end, they are going to be vastly different. So we really have to get a good idea in terms of what the specific needs of the businesses are. And then also we need to know what's happening with our community colleges. What are the programs that you have? When we look at the programs that the high schools are doing, with JB Hensler and Turner, what are the career prep type programs that are there, and that are really pipeline potential for us to look at. So that will get into a process that will take probably, obviously, a month or so for us to complete that whenever we do those. So also be looking, visiting with chamber folks, industry folks, like the Houston Manufacturing Association, Bio Houston, different groups like that. One of the most important things, obviously, that we're going to be looking at doing is creating that steering committee. And that will happen early on in the process. And as I mentioned, there's going to be probably 8 to 12 folks on there. But one of the things that they will be integral in the whole process is they're going to be a sounding board for us when we're going through the study. They'll be receiving information about what's happening. uh, we haven't determined how regularly we're going to meet, but it'll probably be fairly regular. One of the things also that we're looking at doing is actually 2 half-day planning meetings with that group, to where We actually will get together, I would imagine by then, hopefully in a room, and go through the information that Thomas Miller has collected, sharing that, and then actually eventually come out to developing the strategies that will be utilized for the implementation of this. So that's going to be quite an undertaking, quite honestly, in terms of what's going to happen. The next thing, obviously, once we have that steering committee and those half-day planning sessions, will actually come our draft action plan. And that's going to be really, what I think one of the things that we looked at, if you looked at those small goals in our strategies in the Pearland Prosperity Plan, we think, something really defined out in terms of a roadmap for the next 4 or 5 years in what we're going to be looking at doing in that regard. So, we're going to be looking at, the actual role and function, of a committee that's going to be monitoring this, who's going to be participating, what are the specific goals and strategies, what are the metrics, within there. Then obviously we're going to be looking at, developing a job description for a full-time person to actually coordinate this. One of the things that we know uh, from our history, I think, even working with Carol and all of us, is workforce is changing, and you really require someone with very special skills to actually work the programs, because uh, you kind of think about how many people are on this call, and this is a small subset. You think about the number of people that you really need to be integrated with on a daily basis to really get in a good understanding and be able to implement. So we really think it's going to be something that we're going to look at in terms of having a person full time really dedicate themselves to that. Uh, I can tell you, I know a lot of stuff about workforce development, and there's a lot of stuff that I don't know in doing my job. So and we're dealing with it, on a daily basis. But there's so much more, and it just changes so quickly. So I think that's one of the things that we'll look at. Finally, obviously, then we'll get into, finalizing the action plan. There'll be a short summary um, that will pop up in that regard. Yeah, pop-ups that will utilize for the process, just an action sheet, really, when you get down to it. And then finally, we'll actually uh, do a workforce community summit to where we'll actually have a huge presentation about the information and what we plan on doing in that regard. So that'll be culminating everything. And then eventually, obviously, then we'll start looking at uh, who we're going to have on board for this project. Timeline. Uh, that we're looking at for the actual study is to actually begin in June. You can see this is about a 4 or 5 month process. Initially it'll be a lot of data collection, the labor market analysis, forming the steering committee in that regard. Then in July, we actually start looking at doing the interviews for that. The steering committee sessions where we actually bring in for them for the half day, we're targeting in August. We haven't set dates yet for any of this, but that's to be determined in that regard. Then finally you get into developing the action plan in the summit. So we're looking at several months of work here for us to accomplish all this. The and they put this in, Thomas Miller put this in because I really think it was something that was very important when you look at the steering committee. It is something when we look at these groups that, we're going to have folks that are actually, one, available, two, dedicated and being able to participate. Because it will require some time from your business, your schedule in that regard. And the other things, obviously, is we're looking for people who can champion certain things. For us to be successful, we really need our community's involvement, and I think that's the reason they put champions there. That is hugely important for us to be able to do that. So very important whenever we get into looking at the steering committee in that regard, having the capability to work with this group for 6 to 12 months in that regard. This is just to give you an idea of, the estimated cost for the project is going to be about $61,000 for us to do all this, and the EDC is going to be fund this study totally. So, but our next steps in May, we'll actually present to the Pearland Prosperity Committee, get their input in that regard, and then in late May, present to the PEDC Board of Directors for approval. One of the things we have also done is sent the study to a number of different partners for their input and information to look at and review, because obviously, we have a good idea what we think we need to have in there. You guys should have received it, I think, from Carol. So if there are things that you see that, you think is missing, let us know, because we want to have the most inclusive, most developed plan that helps us go forward in that regard. So we appreciate your comments in that regard. So, and I think that's my last slide. So happy to chat and visit about this, but we are looking forward to getting this underway. We've been looking at, Matt and I have been looking at this for about 5 months now, and getting it to this point. So we're ready to have these folks on board and working with all our partners. So.
Brian, thank you for your presentation. Just a couple questions. If someone wanted to sign up to be a part of the steering committee or to be to volunteer for this project, how can they go about doing that?
Probably just send me an email. We haven't determined, because obviously we're going to have a certain number of slots that we have to fill. 8 to 12 is not a lot when you look at all the different partners. So if you're interested, obviously, please send me an email, and then what we're going to have to do is create a master list and then see who is, available. One of the things obviously we're going to eventually have to do is kind of create a job description for the steering committee, because, we want people to be aware of, the time commitment that is going to be required. And, and that's something that, you would need to visit with your employer about, because it is a commitment in that regard. So, but if you're interested, just send me an email, and we'll start, creating a master list, and then we'll try and figure out who's going to be on there. So, great question.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for Brian?
Y'all made it too easy.
Hey, Brian, I got a question for you. This is Kevin. This looks like a really comprehensive plan that you have in place here. Did they talk about some of the similar successes they had? I know they put a lot of examples in here about kind of comparable projects. Have they done something or highlight something recently they did and how it turned out?
Yeah, I mean, they did. I mean, a lot of the programs or places that they have done have really been, we discussed several different examples. They've done some work, I believe, up in Montana for communities similar size as Pearland, but a little more isolated. And that's one of the things, quite honestly, Kevin, that we looked at is what was the success of those. The unique thing I think that we discovered was sometimes there are some correlations of similar events or outcomes, but a lot of them were really uniquely geared or situated or designed for a specific community in that regard. So, and I think that's one of the things that we looked at. Some of the firms that we looked at looked like very cookie cutter, quite honestly, cookie cutter type research and development, whereas this was actually designed to get at what is truly our issue. So that's one of the things that really attracted to us. We did look at most of the examples, and went through and looked at several of the communities that they did and found good results in that regard.
So Brian, do y'all have a lot of activity going on with new businesses coming into Pearland or business expansions?
Always, yeah. I mean, we have been very busy in terms of, we actually had a site visit yesterday, first one in a year and a half, since the pandemic. So, I mean, we are actually starting to see more businesses starting to get out and look and be more active. Our existing industries, obviously, I think, what you said, Siobhan, is a perfect example of some of the issues that we're facing. Things have changed so much in the last year and a half, year in terms of the workforce that it's creating different opportunities in a sense and different issues. But we have several businesses that are, quite honestly, they're just now getting back up to where they were. I mean, you have to remember, not only was it COVID, but last year we got hit with the energy situation. When it dropped down to $0 or negative dollars for a couple of barrels, well, that had a huge impact in our energy industry. So it's taking many of those just this whole year just to recover and get back. So it's changed in that regard, but still a lot of good activity, I think. We have some big projects that we continue to work on that, we hope to announce in the next several months, but it's like anything else, hurry up and wait. That's pretty much our motto of lately. So, but
I just had a I just had a business off of industrial call me, well, the earlier in the meeting, and they're doing a major expansion project, and they're looking for land. They're looking for, they like I said, you're familiar with them, but there's a lot of those blue collar industries. Paul, you guys, the people that do the totes and things like this, these supporting industries for you guys, that is that's a I guess you call the what type of jobs do you call them specifically?
are you asking Paul?
No, I'm asking you, Brian. Your direct paying job. What do you call them? The
Primary jobs?
primary jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, primary, and primary jobs are essentially, typically what you're looking at is manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, or if it's a corporate headquarters, jobs that are actually created and then, you're making something and that is, sent somewhere else in the United States or in Texas. So, that's our primary focus by law, quite honestly. So that's what we look at doing. So. But in all the projects that we're looking at are what we would call primary job related, whether they are manufacturing or some sort of office type situation. So, but there again, we've been working with several of our existing businesses that are, and Carol knows who they are. We had a tour last week with one. But it's a process many times that you have to go through. And Gary, this of someone is interested, well, is there available land? Is there available space where they can do it on site, or do they have to do something somewhere else? And then it's just a question of finding the right situation for them to be able to do something. Many times, we had a contact from a company that is based out of an adjoining city that changed their zoning. So they're trying to figure out, can they operate where they're at? So you get those types of situations. What it, for them, if it was a good location, but something happened and now it's not. So in that regard, but those are always going to happen. But I think we have good activity in terms of businesses looking. It's just a matter of are we the right opportunity? There's a lot of places you can do stuff in Houston when you get down to it. So it's just a matter, are we the right opportunity? Are we the right fit for them?
Brian, I had another comment because this group looks really competent, but I will tell you that doing economic modeling right now in this day and time is very difficult because, you're right in the middle of a year, 14 months into a pandemic. So when you look at data, that's kind of scary. You have to, you look at data to make decisions about today, and we're looking at data that's really it needs to be adjusted. Do they talk to you about some of the challenges they're going to face trying to figure out how to assess going forward when you're looking at data that's kind of unique? It was probably different data, 15, 16 months ago. So, I think this is going to be really interesting time for them to do some work like this. Did they comment on that?
they probably did, Kevin. I just can't remember. It's, we've had so many conversations with them about some of these issues. And obviously, I think your comment is germane, because obviously some things have changed. But when you look at, and some of the data that they're going to look at obviously is for the Houston metro area, when you look at that. So when they look at the huge clusters, those are still going to be fairly relevant. I think the things that have changed and what will give us better insight is when we do some of those interviews, because that will actually tell us specifics about how the companies have seen those specific changes. I mean, it's, the data is going to be whatever it is, obviously, but being able to take the actual experiences of the businesses and then overlay that will allow us really to look at, okay, here's what the data says, here's what the real situation is, how do we mesh that together and come up with a plan. But yeah, that's going to be the tricky part, quite honestly. I mean, that is a good comment. uh,
And
and
I,
one,
and to your point, they're using MZ, which I'm familiar with, and they have really a robust data system. But
yeah,
that's what I think that the data from Houston or a larger area might kind of lessen the effects of kind of something you might see. So I think that's a good idea, kind of looking at Houston, because I know job postings, when you start looking at job postings right now, they're quite different than 16, 18 months ago. Um, and I know some of y'all could probably comment on that, but I know when I look at labor market data that we pull, and I use a little different service, but I think they're all similar. It's kind of tricky on, unless it's adjusted for, some of them have adjusted for COVID and some of their labor market info.
right. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Brian?
Well, I appreciate you guys. If you do have comments, email those to me, because we're forwarding those on to our consultants so that, they have ideas about, things that you're seeing that they need to, make sure they're aware of. We want this to be as good as possible as we can in terms of the end result. And if you're interested, in looking at being on that steering committee, send me that. Then we'll be compiling a list. Obviously, that will happen probably in June sometime, and we'll start putting that together. So appreciate y'all's time this morning.